All right, good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be with you all today and to welcome our speaker, Concepcion de Leon. We're going to begin, as always, with a brief meditation that Tracy Domo will lead us in. And then I'll just give a brief introduction, and then we'd love to hear right from you, Concepcion, okay?
Okay.
All right, Tracy, go ahead.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. One, two, three.
Oh, Catherine, I think you're muted.
So sorry. Thanks, Concepcion. I like you already. Concepcion joins us this morning from the New York Times, where she's a reporter covering breaking news. She also writes a column that covers Latinx culture. She was born in the Dominican Republic, but raised in Queens. And we are so eager to hear your story and how you got to where you are. And we have a bunch of really great questions for you as well. So we look forward to getting to know you this morning. Thanks so much for coming.
Awesome. Okay, I'm so excited to talk to you guys. It's so sad that we have to do it virtually and I wasn't able to come in person and see all of you guys in the audience, but it'll be good. This will be good anyway. So I'll tell you guys a little bit about myself. So as Catherine said, I was born in Dominican Republic. I came here when I was like 3 or 4 years old, so I've been here kind of like forever. And was actually undocumented for a really long time. So I was undocumented for most of my childhood. And so I was going to public schools and kind of just like reading a lot. I was really into reading when I was younger. So that was kind of my primary hobby and activity. I did a lot of like vocabulary contests and essay contests. Vocabulary contests are kind of like spelling bee. I don't know if all schools did this or this was just particular for my school, but it was literally like you would memorize a whole like pages and pages of definitions of words. And then you would have to get on stage and sort of match the definition with the word. So sort of like a spelling bee. And so I was doing all of that. And then at the same time, outside of school, I was helping my dad at his job. He works at, he used to own and owns now a small refrigeration business where he sells like secondhand refrigerators and stoves and things like that. So I would always go after school and help him there. And also at the same time trying to work on getting legalized. So that took some time. I went to middle school and elementary school in Queens, where I grew up. I grew up in Corona, Queens, and then I went to high school in the city at this high school called Bard High School Early College. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's basically a program that Bard College started with the Department of Education in New York City, where it's a public school. It's totally free. There's like an application process to get in. But the idea is that some high school students or some students are ready to take college classes in high school. And it's also to help people save money. So you get 2 years of college education free. So the first 2 years of high school are just regular high school classes. And then the second 2 years are college classes, it was really such an amazing experience because I got to pick my classes. It was all with college professors. And so it was really fun. And then when I graduated, I had a high school diploma and an associate's degree. And a lot of people were able to transfer all of those credits and either graduate early or spend more time abroad. And I had the option of either graduating early, but I wasn't really ready to leave school. And I also really wanted to go abroad for a whole year. And so I used the credits for that instead. But before I graduated, I actually didn't get legalized until I was 17 or 18, actually. So I ended up spending a few months of my high school senior year in the Dominican Republic. I had to go back and sort of deal with the whole visa process there. And so I did that for a few months, maybe from like December to March or something like that. So it was funny because I was actually doing remote schooling a little bit too. I wasn't sitting in on classes or anything like that, but I was getting assignments and having to sort of write my essays from the Dominican Republic and send them to my teachers here so that I could graduate. So I got a little taste of what you guys are going through now, although I know that some of you are back in school. And so, but because I was undocumented, I actually, like I said, my senior year, I became documented, but it was after I did my college application process. And so when I was applying to schools, I was sort of trying to pick schools that were small liberal arts school that tended to give, that had kind of big endowments that could give me scholarships because I wasn't eligible for financial aid. And so I ended up applying to a lot of really small schools in the Midwest and in upstate New York or like in New England. And the school that I ended up going to is a school in Iowa, which was a huge change for me because obviously I grew up in New York City, which is one of the biggest cities in the world. And going from there to like the cornfields of Iowa was a huge change. And it was really, really hard for me at first, in part, first of all, because I wasn't used to being somewhere that wasn't diverse, right? New York City and Queens specifically is one of the most diverse places in the world. And so I was used to just going anywhere and everyone just being like, oh, you're Dominican. Like it was just kind of a given. Everyone understood. Everyone knew where the Dominican Republic was. Everyone knew that I spoke Spanish. And then I went to Iowa and no one knew any of that. It was a much more sort of narrow vision of race. And people were like, well, so you're clearly Black, but like, what are you mixed with? You have, I mean, I have braids now, but I have curly hair naturally. And they're like, you have curly hair. So like, they just couldn't understand like where I was from or why I spoke Spanish, or they didn't understand that Afro-Latinos even existed. Tracy and I were talking about this a little bit in the breakout room, that there just isn't very much representation for Afro-Latinos. And so if you leave New York City, where there are so many Afro-Latinos and so many different people from all over the world, I think we have something here that I call sort of like the privilege of specificity, where we have the privilege of being seen for like the nuanced person that we are in a lot of cases, or in most cases rather. But when I went to Iowa, no, a lot of people were from cities, even big cities like Chicago or LA, where there just aren't as many Afro-Latinos or even as many Latinos in general or Latinx people in general. And so the first couple of years of college were really difficult for me because I felt like I had to explain myself all the time. I had to say why I spoke Spanish. And I ended up majoring in Spanish. And in large part, it was because I missed home so much and I missed speaking Spanish so much. And it was such a big part of my culture and my identity. And I couldn't really do it there, you know? But Grinnell was a great school. I think, like I said, it was very hard for me socially because I was I was the only Dominican person there the first year. And then one other Dominican person came my second year. But it was a lonely time, and I had friends and everything, but I think that it was a little bit hard for me to kind of find myself. It required me to really think about my identity in a way that I'd never had to before. And now I'm grateful for it because I think I learned a lot about myself, and it sort of taught me a lot about like the Black diaspora, the African diaspora that I didn't really have to think about before. But it was a little hard at the time. But like I said, it was a great school. I had really, really great teachers, and Grinnell's fun because Grinnell's sort of, I mean, people that went there would sort of call it like a school for people that that were kind of like unique and different and maybe didn't fit in high school. It was sort of a college for everyone. You know, there was a really good culture of inclusivity where everyone was accepted. We had a lot of different events and a lot of different talks, and there was just this culture of accepting everyone, which was really amazing and really special, I think, especially once I visited other schools. But so then I majored in Spanish. I also majored in Chinese because I've took Chinese since ninth grade in high school, because we were required to take a language in high school, and our only three options at the time when I was going there were Chinese, Spanish, and Latin. And I remember there were we got to take each language for 2 weeks in the beginning of ninth grade, and it was literally like Goldilocks. So I tried Spanish, and I was like, this is too easy. I already know Spanish. I don't want to do this. And then we tried Latin, and I was like, this is really hard. And then I did Chinese, and I was like, this is perfect. It's right in the middle. Like, it's challenging, but it's doable. And it was really interesting and something that I had never tried before. And then when I went to college, I was like, I might as well just continue it. And I ended up majoring in Chinese, majoring in Spanish, which was fun, the Spanish major, because it was kind of like a literature major, because I got to skip a lot of the intro classes. So it's kind of just like majoring in English, but majoring in Spanish. So I took a lot of literature classes and read a lot of books and wrote a lot of essays, which was fun, in Spanish, of course. And but then I ended up studying abroad in China and Spain, which was amazing and scary and exciting and really an adventure. In China, I was in Hangzhou, which is this kind of like medium-sized city near Shanghai, and in Spain, I was in Madrid, and China was just like such a cool place. I mean, I had never traveled. Like I said, I was undocumented for a really long time. So at that point, it was like the furthest I had ever traveled. I had only ever been to the Dominican Republic. I remember I stepped off the plane and I was just like, this is a different world. Like, it was just so different from anything I had ever experienced. And like I said, it was really scary. And I had an issue that I'm still working on and is really hard, but I was very much so a perfectionist. I'm a recovering perfectionist. And so when I was in China, the first few months were really hard because I think that I was scared to even talk, because I was scared to make a mistake. And that's something that I really had to learn, was that you only learn by making mistakes, you know? And so once I started putting myself out there, and once I started just like talking and talking, like I learned so much, and it started just becoming second nature. Um, and it was such a fun time. It was very cheap. My money went a really long way. And then right after, I went to Spain, and it was the opposite. And I was like, oh my God, I felt so rich in China, and now I feel so poor in Spain. But Spain was also amazing. I got to go to I was stationed in Madrid. That was where I was studying abroad, but I got to travel all over Spain. I went to this fire festival in Valencia. I went to Barcelona, and all these different cities that I never would have gotten to go to. I mean, maybe like in the future, but you know, it was at that point, college was covering it, which was really nice. My college was covering it. And got to go to Italy like during my spring break. So that was a really fun time. Highly recommend studying abroad when you guys get there. And then I came back, and when I started my career, so I'll skip to graduation, did my senior year at Grinnell. And then once I started my career, I kind of wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I don't know about you guys, but when I was growing up, the careers that were available to me or that my family talked about were like lawyer, doctor, teacher, and engineer. Those were like the four careers that I heard about. And so out of those, I was like, well, I could not be an engineer or a doctor because math was not my strong suit. Science was not my strong suit. I really like reading and writing, so I guess I'll be a lawyer. And I actually ended up taking the LSAT and applying to law school, but I knew that I didn't want to go to law school. And I knew that I wanted to do something in writing and with books, but I didn't know how to get there and didn't really have the right connections at the time. So when I graduated college, I was like, okay, let me just apply to all these jobs in publishing. So I was like, at that time, I was like, I really want to be a book editor. So I applied to all these jobs in publishing, did not hear back from one single person. No, it was like throwing my resume into a black hole, because what I didn't know at the time was that you have to know people. And if you don't know people in that industry, then it's really, really, really hard to break in. But like I said, at that time, I didn't know that. And so I was just like, well, I guess I'm never going to do this. And so I ended up taking the first job that I got, or the first job that I could find. And it was in Boston. I went to Boston. I was working at an educational consulting company, recruiting students from China, Korea, and Vietnam to study in American high schools. And that was fine. You know, it had its good parts and its bad parts, but it just wasn't what I wanted to do. You know, it wasn't my passion. And so about a year and a half later, I was like, okay, I'm going to try this book publishing thing again. So I applied to something called the Columbia Publishing course, which is this course at Columbia University where they teach you all about book publishing and media. And so I did that. And then that was kind of what launched my career. It was where I met all the people that I needed to know. It was where I learned that even though I love book publishing, I love books and reading, I really preferred the media part. Once so the books part were the first 3 weeks, and then the second 3 weeks were the media part. And I remember during the books part, I was like, oh, this is nice. Like, I could do this. And then the media people came and I was like, this is my jam. Like, this is exactly what I want to do, because it was kind of like more fast paced. There was a lot of idea generation. Every day it felt like you were doing something new. Whereas with books, again, it's an amazing industry, but you would be working on a book for like a year and a half. And I was like, I don't think that I could work on a book for a year and a half. So I ended up, but I wasn't sure yet, right? So once I finished the course, I took 2 internships. I took one internship at a publishing company, working in the marketing department for their children's publishing for Penguin Random House, which is one of the biggest publishing companies. And I also took an internship at New York Magazine, and ended up confirming that I did want to go into magazines, and then went from there. My first job was at Glamour Magazine. My first job in media was at Glamour Magazine. Started off as an editorial assistant, became an assistant editor, and wrote a lot there. I wrote a lot about politics and culture, and wrote a lot of lifestyle stories. And then I also edited a few pages in the magazine. So I was responsible for filling the money pages and the career pages. And then did that for a while. And then I was like, oh, I kind of feel like I want to write more like that. I want to go into the writing end of things. And so I ended up I ended up quitting my job, kind of like just because I was ready to do it. I saved up money. I took a second job as a waitress, because at the time, editorial assistants and assistant editors did not make a lot of money. I think that there's a lot of change happening in the industry right now where they're pushing to increase the starting salary for editorial assistants, which I think is amazing. They've already done it in book publishing. I think they've increased it like $15,000. I mean, this is really far away for you guys, but I just think it's money is very important. It's not the most important thing, but it's very important just to allow people to do the things that they love. And so I think it's great that they're making it more equitable. But anyway, so I quit my job, saved up money by getting a second job, and actually moved to the Dominican Republic and did some freelance writing for a while, which was really fun. And did that for about 3 or 4 months. And then I ended up getting connected to someone at the Times who was my first boss there. And it was the editor of the New York Times Book Review. And she said, we're looking for a writer. I hear that you might be good for this. The director of the Columbia Publishing course recommended me. Did all of my interviews remotely like this because I was in the Dominican Republic and they were here. And I ended up getting the job, and that's how I got to the Times. And I was actually writing for the books desk, covering like books and authors and publishing until recently, when I moved to something called the Express desk, and now I do breaking news at the Times. So basically anything that happens. Recently, I've been doing a lot of plane crashes and um, like government corruption and just random things that come up, or like Black Lives Matter protests, because of course that's something that's happening a lot now. And that's where I am now. And I think we're right at time. I went a little bit over. So I would love to hear all of your questions.
That was wonderful, Concepcion. Thank you so, so much.
Yeah.
We have a lot of really great questions. And our first one is actually from Sitlali, who you
Okay.
met in the green room.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put her on. Sitlali, go ahead.
Hi. In your bio, it states that you are a curator of Espace, which is a weekly column for Latinx audience.
Mm-hmm.
So my question for you is, what was the reason that El Espace was created? And if you could just tell us more about this awesome project a little bit more, if that's okay with you.
Yeah. So I pitched it because It was just needed. I felt like there wasn't a lot of Latino Latinx representation in the Times, and in a lot of media. You know, there are a lot of great publications that are dedicated to Latinx people. So Remezcla is one of them. Me Too is another one. Pero Like is like the BuzzFeed vertical that does like videos for Latino people. But there wasn't really anything in a publication like New York Times, right? And so I I remember last year, was it last year? I think it was last year, maybe the year before. Um, Someone named Monica Drake was promoted to the masthead. So the masthead is basically like the people at the top of the newspaper or at the top of the magazine. So they're like the executive editor, the managing editor, like the people that were promoted to kind of run the newsroom. So Monica Drake is the first Black woman to ever be promoted to the masthead, and this was only about 2 years ago. And she was promoted to a special team called Special Projects, which basically was responsible for like creating new things at the time, seeing what we needed to do and change, and like and finding the right people in the newsroom to do it. And so when she was promoted, and she was promoted specifically to do special projects, I pitched this idea to her, and I was like, you know, I think it'd be really cool if there was a newsletter that catered specifically to the Latino audience in the United States. I feel like anytime that we cover Latino people, it's all about immigration. It's all about like, you know, the sort of terrible things that are happening to us or the ways that we're being treated, but you don't talk about the people that have been here forever, right? There are Latino people that were born here, that have been here for a generation, or even new immigrants who have been here for a really long time or not been here for a really long time, but are trying to navigate this new country. And so I thought that it would be really cool to have something specifically catered to that, to those people. We at the time, we don't have this anymore, but at the time we already had New York Times in Espanol, which catered to a Latin American audience. So it was like people in Mexico, in the Dominican Republic, in you know, in Colombia, and and so I thought that we needed something for that community here. So I pitched it to Monica Drake, and she thought it was a really great idea. And so she had me start it as a column at the Times first before we could do a newsletter. And actually, you know, we're not doing Espace anymore, sadly. And it was really great while it lasted. We got a lot of really great feedback. But it's really hard to start new projects at a place like the Times, because the Times has been around for like a century, like a really, really long time. And once you have sort of established ways of doing things and established systems, it's really hard to start new things. And so I still push for representation and push for these stories and try to pitch them when I can write them. But we weren't able to do it. But I'm glad that it's still up there, and I still get emails about it, and I still, you know, get pitches for it because people were so excited that it existed. And hopefully we can start something like it again. But yeah, but I'm so glad that you got to read some of it. It was so fun to write, and to edit, because I actually got to bring some other writers in to write it as well.
We're going to go to Karine Guzman next for her question.
Hi, Karine.
Hello. I read in your biography that you're a Glamour magazine alum, and you edited the work and money section. And I was wondering, what are some of your main tasks as an editor? What are the things you must focus on and prioritize?
That's a great question. So a lot of things. At Glamour, so it's interesting because the way Glamour works and the way the New York Times work are a little bit different. So at Glamour, there were different teams for everything. So there was, I was an editor, and so I was responsible essentially for reaching out to writers or working with writers to like get new ideas into the magazine, and also pitching them to my executive editor, my editor in chief, and they sort of approved the ideas. So I got the ideas from the writers, or if I had an idea that I would write, I could also do that, which I did a few times. and then I would pitch them to my bosses, and they would be like, okay, this is what we want. This is, you know, this idea is good. This idea is like, could use some work. And they would kind of guide me in how they wanted the story to be written. And then I would work with the writer and kind of shape the story. So they would give in a draft, and then I would kind of go through and edit it and say, you know, like maybe we can bring this part up, or we can reorganize it, or it, you know, your lead, which is the first kind of like the first paragraph or the first few paragraphs, needs to be stronger, or you could use another scene, which is kind of when you're sort of writing a section that sounds like that has some dialogue, or when you're describing something, or describing something that actually happened in the world, like I was in a room, and, you know, whatever, like things like that can be more interesting. So it's just sort of trying to make it both make sense, but also fit in with the voice that the publication has. So Glamour had a very conversational voice. So it was like, they really wanted our editor-in-chief really wanted the stories to sound like you were talking to your best friend. And so I had to sometimes edit the stories if they were too stiff, or like if they were more academic, I had to make them sound more like, oh, this is like you're talking to your best friend, you know. So that was some of the editing that I did. And then from there it would go to copy, who would do kind of like really edit line by line and word by word, and be like, did you misspell this? Is this like grammatically correct? And then we had a research team that made sure that everything was accurate and that all the details were right. So so it was like different teams did different things. And then at the Times, editors do more things, because the editor does the fact checking, and they also edit for, you know, style and everything. So so it varies, and depending on where you work, basically, but essentially they kind of just reorganize the article or whatever it is, the essay, to make it fit into the style or the voice of the publication.
Thank you. That's such a clear explanation. That was helpful for me too.
Oh, I'm glad.
And fact checking is super important these days. Isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah, it's very important.
All right, we're going to go to Yuritsi next.
Hi, Yuritsi.
Hi, good morning. I saw in your bio that you helped edit an article about helping people in Ecuador and beyond for indigenous groups to be seen. What was it like working with the writers of this article, and what are some things that have resonated with you after you read it?
I'm trying to remember which one specifically you're talking about. I think this must have been in Espace. God, you know, I don't remember the specific article that you're talking about, but if I'm remembering correctly, it was something that I wrote, and I think that it was in response to like indigenous, kind of like indigenous protests in Latin America. There's been a lot of protests in Latin America, which I'm sure some of you guys are aware of, by indigenous communities that are sort of like fighting to be seen. And I think it's so important. I don't know if you guys saw, there was a movie a couple years ago that came out called Roma. And there was an actress in that movie, the main actress, or one of the main actresses, there were two of them, was this indigenous actress from Mexico. And it was such a big deal because we were talking in the green room about how, and I said earlier, how Afro-Latinos and indigenous people are not really represented in like TV or in movies. And so she was someone that kind of like made indigenous people more visible in Mexico, but also all over the world, because that movie was on Netflix. And so everyone saw it. And so I think in response to that, there were a lot of, I mean, this has been happening for a while, but I think after that, there's been more visibility to the movements that indigenous people have been doing in Latin America to just be seen and get like equal rights and just the most basic things, similar to the Black Lives Matter movement here. And so it was really great to sort of like learn about that and to think more about it, to write about it, because I think sometimes when things aren't right in our face, we're not thinking about it all the time. And so for me, I was just like, it was great to sort of like hear more about different people's realities, because I think that it opens your mind and it just sort of helps you see what other people in the world are going through. So it was really special.
Awesome, thank you. We're gonna go to Vanessa next.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi. What would you say is the most challenging part of being a news reporter?
Good question. I think that the most challenging part is how fast you have to get things in, especially the team that I'm on now because it's breaking news. Literally, they want a story in like 2 hours, which is a really short amount of time because you have to call a lot of people to get the story. So basically, when I get a story, let's say I start at 12 p.m. There are different shifts for the breaking news team. If I start at 12 p.m. Or 4 p.m., which is what I'm doing now. So I'm working nights now. Um, I get a story and they're like, can you just turn something around on this 500 words on this thing? 500 words is not that many words, right? Or even sometimes it's like 300 words. It's not a lot of words. It's like a page or less than a page. But the thing is that you have to call, like, if it's something that's going on, that if it's a crime, you have to call the police department. And sometimes they don't pick up and you have to wait for them to get back to you, or you have to email them and then they don't give you everything you need. And so you have to like, you know, wait for, keep reaching out and following up to get all the information. And so even though it's not a lot of words, it's packed with so much information that you have to get from different sources, that it takes some time, right? So I think the hardest part is definitely how fast you have to get the stories to your editor. And then when your editor comes, sometimes my editor will be like, well, you need more information than you have in there. So sometimes you have to do even more reporting. So I would say like reporting under a time constraint is very challenging because sometimes, I mean, like you're sort of like in a rush and you're like, I have to get this. But the people you're talking to, they have a million other things that they're doing. And so they're not thinking about you as their main priority. And so it's sort of getting people to talk to you in a timely manner can sometimes be really hard. Or just like yesterday, for instance, or the day before, I was working on covering this hurricane that was hitting Mexico, or about to hit Mexico. I believe it hit on yesterday, on Wednesday. No, yesterday was Thursday, on Wednesday though. And so on Tuesday, I was covering this hurricane, and the National Hurricane Service, or the National Hurricane Center, was publishing updates they published one update at like 11 a.m., another one at 2 p.m., and another one at like 8 p.m. and 11 p.m., something like that. And my shift started at 4. And so I started covering the hurricane at 6, but I pretty much couldn't do anything until 8 p.m. when they put up their update. So it's also just kind of like working with other people's timeline.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Our next question comes from Troy, and Troy is joining us from home. You're probably noticing that some of our kids are here at school with their masks on.
That's great.
And others are joining us remotely. But here's
wow, you have a really cool room, Troy.
Thank you.
I love it.
Okay, so my question for you is, what are some of the challenges that you faced with work during the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think that what was hardest, I'm someone who loves, what do you call it? Water cooler talk. I don't know if you guys know what this is, but basically when you work somewhere, a large part of your day is spent working, but there's some time when you have some downtime and you can kind of stand by the water cooler, so to speak, or during lunch when you can kind of like catch up with colleagues and talk about what you're watching and sort of like, watch the latest show, talk about the latest shows. I live for water cooler talk. I love talking to my coworkers. I love catching up with them. I loved, having lunch with my friends from work. And so for me, when I came home, that was a big loss for me. I really missed it. I felt like my work days were lonelier. I felt like I didn't really get to talk to as many people. I mean, I feel very lucky because I actually live at home. And so like my dad lives upstairs, my siblings live upstairs, my uncle lives we all kind of live in one house together. And then I live in like my own apartment. But it's really nice because that's made me feel less lonely because I have my family around, and like one of my best friends actually lives nearby as well. And so it's been really nice to just not, if I lived completely alone, that would be really sad. And I would really, really miss the water cooler talk. But I think that helped with that. But still, that's definitely what I missed the most from work and what was really hard for me to adjust to. And then of course, just like learning how to communicate and like do everything virtually. My team never really worked on Slack, which is this messaging system that people use to communicate at work sometimes. My team didn't really have to do that because we all sat next to each other. So we just talked to each other. But then everyone had to convert to Slack. And that was really hard for some people who weren't used to using that technology. So sometimes that was challenging.
Can I actually maybe add on a little question to Troy's question?
Yes, please do.
In the green room, when I came in, you guys were talking about some book recommendations, and I wanted you to maybe share them with this larger group. If you read anything good over, the quarantine, or any book recommendations, we would love to hear them.
Yeah, so one that I recommended, I actually have it right here. It's called Stamped. And it's actually an adaptation of an adult book by Ibram Kendi. And Ibram Kendi is like one of the foremost scholars on racist theories, kind of. So he studies the history of racism. So he wrote this really amazing book called Stamped from the Beginning was what the adult version was called. And then Jason Reynolds, who's really, really great YA writers. You guys should definitely check him out if you haven't. He has more than a dozen books, a ton of books. I actually wrote a profile of him once for the Times. Always goes to different schools and does different events to talk. But he wrote something that he called a remix of the book. You see right here, a remix of Stamped from the Beginning. And so this book is really good. I actually have it because I got it from my younger siblings. And it's basically a history of racism, but it's written in a really approachable way. It's really fun. Jason Reynolds is a really approachable writer. So I think you guys would really enjoy it. And then another book that I recommended is called The Undocumented Americans. And that's an adult book. It's a work of creative nonfiction. It's by this woman named Carla Cornejo. Let me see, I'm looking at Villavicencio. And she's an Ecuadorian immigrant. She's undocumented. And it's sort of like a mix between a memoir, but also she talked to undocumented people all over the country, including undocumented people that worked in the World Trade Center when it felt not worked in the World Trade Center, but helped clean up Ground Zero after 9/11, undocumented people and how they're experiencing the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, day laborers in Staten Island. So she just kind of talked to a variety of undocumented people. And her goal was just to show them in the way that she didn't see them written about in books, we always kind of see people, Latinx people. I mean, right now there are a lot of Latinx writers that are doing great work. Like Elizabeth Acevedo is a really, really great writer, for instance. Lilian Rivera is a really great writer as well. But generally, historically, there hasn't been great representation specifically for undocumented immigrants. And so she just kind of wanted to write about them as if they were real people, because they are, and talk about what they like and what they, the things they care about and their feelings and all of that. And it's a really, really great book. I'm almost done with it. And I highly recommend it. And she's just really relatable. She has a really interesting upbringing because she was raised in Queens and kind of just got really lucky and had people that helped her kind of go to school, kind of benefactors, I guess. And so she went to Harvard. She's getting her PhD at Yale. And it's just super brilliant. And then anything by Elizabeth Acevedo, I also recommend. I don't know if you guys have read anything by her. She has 3 books, The Poet X, what's the name of that second book? With the Fire on High, and Clap When You Land. Those are her 3 books. She's a Dominican American writer, really great, Afro-Latina, and writes about the Dominican experience, which is, also not really written about a lot in books. So those are, I think, the 3 that I would recommend right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, we're going to go to Catherine Leon next for her question.
Hi, and good morning.
Hi.
As a writer and a reporter for the New York Times, how do you find strategies or ways to captivate the people who read your work?
Oh, great question. Something that I care about a lot is writing for people of color. So when I'm writing, what I'm thinking about is I'm thinking about, you know, a Latinx person, a Black person, like someone on the other side that looks like me, you know? And so when I think about captivating people, I think about like, how do I captivate them, you know? And a part of it is like writing in a way that's approachable, writing in a way that isn't, sometimes I think that people, writers, take themselves a little too seriously and sort of like think about their writing as sort of a way for them to like show off how smart they are. And that can be fun too, but mostly, you know, people, I think especially for news reporting, you're giving people information. And so it's really important that people understand what you're saying and like get what the history is and get the context and all of that. So I just try to write, I think that my time at Glamour was actually really helpful in that way because it helped me write in a way that's like more conversational. And so that's something that I try to bring to my reporting at the Times, is just writing in a way that's like saying what I mean and not trying to just use like these big fancy words that no one's going to understand. And so so sometimes that can be as simple, you know, going back to writing for people of color, that can be as simple as like knowing what I need to explain and what I don't need to explain. One time I remember I read this story and it was something about movies and it described 3 movies and 2 of them were not described. It was like, I don't even remember what they were, like walking in the rain. I don't know. Like singing in the, that's a song actually from a movie. That's not a movie, but I don't know. It was like some movie that I had never seen. And then the 3rd movie was Notorious. It was the movie about Notorious B.I.G. And that was the only movie that they said like, it was like blah, 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 and Notorious about like the rapper, you know, Notorious B.I.G. And I was like, that's the only one I've seen out of all of these movies. And yet this is the only one that was explained. And I feel like when even little things like that, it's like telling me like, oh, this isn't for me. Like you're not writing this for me because you're explaining something that I already know, but these other movies that I don't know anything about, you're not explaining. And so it's also just like keeping in mind little things like that, just like making sure that I'm not explaining things that don't need to be explained and speaking as if I'm talking to the people that I actually want to write about and write to.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
We do want to be mindful of your time this morning. Do you have time for 2 more questions? Is that okay?
Yeah,
Okay, great.
that's fine.
All right, we're going to go to Alan next.
Hi, my name's Alan. I'm in the 8th grade, and my question for you is, who has led you to be who you are today?
Oh, wow. I love that question. So, definitely my dad. So when I first came to the United States, my parents immigrated here first and I was in DR, and then they brought me here a couple years later. And so my mom and my dad were here for the first couple years, but then my mom actually had to go to the Dominican Republic after a couple of years because you know, she was sick and she had to leave. And so I was actually raised by my dad. He was a single dad. And so he basically shaped who I am today. And his big thing was like education. Like he was like, once you get your degree, he's like, that's all I care about. Like, I'm not going to be on your case. Like you can live your life. I just really want you to get an education. And so I think that he was really strict with me growing up. Like he was, you know, sometimes almost too strict. Like if I didn't get an A, he was like, what is going on? Why are you failing at life? And I was like, Dad, it's just a B plus. But it made me have really high standards and also just sort of try to do my best at everything that I do. And also I think like opened up my mind to believing that I could accomplish anything. I think my dad always told me that I could accomplish anything. And I think it's really important to believe that, because the first step in like, you know, reaching your goals or your dreams is just believing that you can, you know. And so yeah, so definitely my dad. And also just like I was a big reader, so like the many writers that I read over the years, I would say I was raised by books as well.
I love that. All right, we're going to go to Jocelyn Santa Maria for our last question.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I would like to thank you for speaking to us today.
Oh yeah, thank you so much.
My question for you is, what was the most challenging story you have had to cover, and how did you overcome that challenge?
That's a good question. I think that the hardest story I did, just in terms of like structure, was a story that I wrote about book deserts. So it was basically about places where there aren't bookstores, or there aren't a lot of bookstores, or there aren't a lot of libraries. Like there are places in America where it's really, really hard to get books, for people to get books. And so that story was really hard because I had to talk to a lot of people. And when you have so much information, sometimes it's hard to know like what order to put it in. When I was in school, when I was like in high school and college, research papers were really hard for me for this reason, like because you had to draw from all these sources. And you guys will, I'm sure you'll experience this more. I'm sure you do it now, but also will experience it more in like high school and college, where you have to kind of like read these like academic articles and read books and write about what you're learning. And that was really hard for me. And now I have to do it for a living. and so that was hard because I had to kind of draw from a lot of sources and condense a lot of information. But outside of that, I think just like the work that I'm doing now is really hard. Breaking news is hard because of what I mentioned earlier, just like how fast you have to do it, and also because you have to write about something different every single day. So it's like one day I'll write about like a Black Lives Matter protest and like something that happened there. Like the other day I had to write about this terrible incident where someone drove through a Black Lives Matter protest and people were injured. And then the next day I had to write about like this like police chief that cheated to get his job. And then another day I had to write about like a plane crash in Queens. There was just a plane crash in Queens a couple days ago, like a week ago or something. And so it's like you have to write about so many different things. And so you have to talk to different people for all these different stories. And sometimes I don't know who the right person to talk to is, and I have to figure it out. And so I think that's challenging. It feels like every day you're learning something new. Like I did not know what the FAA did, the Federal Aviation Administration. And now I do because I've covered like 5 plane crashes. And so yeah, so it's kind of like you're learning every day. So I think that's one of the hardest things about being a journalist, is that you don't know the answers. You have to find them. And that's the work.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Concepcion. This has been such a fun morning, getting to know you and learning about your work. We'd love to end just with another brief meditation that Tracy will lead us in to sort of take in all that you've shared. And then our head of school, Ivan Hageman, will share some final reflections.
Amazing.
Okay. All right, here we go.
1, 2, 3. One, two, three.
Thanks, Tracy. And thank you. What a wonderful, wonderful morning you've given us. Concepcion de Leon. Your name intimates the fierceness of your ability to project your understanding of the world through language, particularly the pinnacle of journalism at the New York Times. I mean, just you're a wonderful example for all of young humanity, and particularly for our students who are predominantly Afro-Latino or Black, and in the struggle for rising to positions of dignity and influence. The heart of our mission says that we want our children to adapt to change and to create lives of deep meaning, create and share lives of deep meaning, dynamic virtue, and transcendent joy. And you really have done that. And so you share meaning in this most powerful and professional way You've done it with us this morning. You do it daily. You're probably waking up before you're supposed to because you're on the night shift. So I'm grateful for that as well. But last year, almost an epigram for our graduating class, our pandemic classes, they quoted Maya Angelou, and she said, "You won't remember what people said or what people did, but how they made you feel. But we will remember your precision with language, and you made us feel confident, and you made us feel proud, and we're really grateful for you, Concepcion de Leon." Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was such a privilege to be here, and I was so glad to talk to you guys. And I'm available if you guys want to email me for any reason. You guys can get my information from Catherine or whoever. And yeah, I wish you guys the best of luck. And thank you so much for listening and for your amazing questions. You guys are really special.
Have a beautiful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You guys have a
Concepcion de
beautiful day.
León. Aplausos.
Bye. Sí, hablamos.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.